Welcome. I'm Steve Barg, City Administrator for the City of Marshfield, and this is another edition of the Post-Council Meeting News Conference. We do this after every meeting of the Common Council, so you can get a chance to find out what was discussed, what happened, and what it might mean to you going forward. And I'm joined today by Mike Warren of the Hub City Times, and take it away, Mike.
All right, thank you, Steve. Thanks for the invitation, as always. We certainly do appreciate it. Okay. The council meeting on July 12th was an interesting one in that there were a couple of, I guess, sort of, I don't know, headline type agenda items. And one item that I'll start with actually goes back the past couple of years, where the Common Council had made a decision 2 different times to not do this. And then July 12th, they made the decision to do this. And all 3 votes, narrow margins, including this most recent one, a 6-4 decision, to basically let me just read the agenda item, and then I'll let you interpret it from there, and we'll maybe have a little discussion. Request to reconsider previous council decision regarding the prohibition of weapons in City Hall. Now, I'm not sure how accurate actually that description is based on what the council decided to do on the 12th, but bring us up to speed.
Well, yeah, this does go back to 2019, Mike. It's the 3rd time we've talked about this publicly. It was discussed and voted upon in 2019 and 2021, and as you said, it was close both times. One time it was 5-4 against lifting the prohibition and removing the signs. By the way, if you go to City Hall, you will see, it's still there right now, but they'll be coming down, signs that say no firearms or weapons in the building. So 5-4 the first time. Then 5-5 the second time in 2021, and you say, well, what did the mayor do? Well, that was when we didn't have a mayor. That was when Nick Paschal was filling in for that role as council president. So no one was there to break the tie. So it's always been close, and it really, Mike, it reminds me of if you turn on cable TV and you see some of these debates between people on different sides of the spectrum, and one side makes a strong argument that guns can create problems, accidental accidents. Some people don't feel safe around them. On the other side, hey, bad apples, if you will, don't read signs. If they're coming in to do harm to somebody at City Hall, they're not going to leave their gun in the car because of the sign. So this time it was a 6-4 vote. Brian Varsho changed his vote. He had voted against previously, and that moved us from 5-5 to 6-4. But again, it was a very similar debate. They clarified the fact that they were only talking about City Hall. It was brought up, well, what about the library? What about the fire station, the police station, those kind of buildings? The conversation last night only applied to City Hall, and truthfully, some of those other buildings are governed by other bodies. The Library Board and the Fire and Police Commission make the call there. So it only applied to City Hall, but it has been lifted, so you'll see the signs come down now, and you will be able to do not just concealed carry, but we said weapons in general. I guess we only talk about firearms, but there's no prohibition at this point on any of it.
Okay, to clarify, concealed carry or not?
You're allowed to conceal carry.
Okay. We're only talking about concealed carry of weapons?
No, we're not. We're talking broadly about allowing firearms and weapons into the building. And, I
can walk in there with a gun in hand.
Open carry, apparently, according to the police chief, has always been allowed. I'm not sure I fully understand that either.
Okay.
But,
right.
There's going to be a day when somebody's going to say, can I walk in there with a machete or whatever? Right. And I don't know what that day is going to look like. But for the most part, we're talking about what's going on in Wisconsin, which is people who want to do concealed carry. Yeah. And we've heard a number of people over time say, look, I can go into businesses, I can go into my church, I can go into all sorts of places. Why can't I go into City Hall and have my firearm with me? And now that is being lifted at City Hall. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Open carry has been already defined as, it's always been.
Correct.
You can, in other words, what you see mostly is people have them holstered.
Correct.
On their belt or whatever, and they can carry it around or ride around with it like that on their motorcycle or in their car or whatever even. So we're talking about concealed carry, not just guns. Are we talking knives? Anything?
Yeah, I would presume so, because the word weapon seems pretty broad to me.
Yeah, Okay, this doesn't define what a weapon is necessarily.
No, it doesn't at all. And I've already had a request, by the people in the frontline staff at City Hall to meet with them and talk a little bit about this, because, safety is a thought that people are going to have, and they're going to want to know, well, how do I respond if a person takes it out and points it at my, what am I doing to try and protect myself and my coworkers. But again, I recognize that this is being done all over the state of Wisconsin, and now the council has decided to extend it to the city, and I get it. Like I said earlier, the people coming in to do us ill will, to do us harm, are not turned away because of the sign. So this offers an opportunity to, I guess for City Hall to protect itself, if you will.
Right. It was introduced or presented by, and again, this is maybe one of the reasons it passed now versus the previous two times. The council makeup has changed.
It has. It has.
You mentioned Alderman Varsho changed his vote from the last time, but also this was presented by a new alderman, Mike O'Reilly, who said it, and I quote, "It frustrates me that a local government body like this feels that they have the ability to take away a Second Amendment right of a citizen to protect themselves." I look at that sign out there, for example, he's meaning the one at City Hall or at the door or whatever, and common sense tells me that is going to stop no one that is going to come in here with bad intentions. So that was, part of the thought process he had. He was the presenter of this, and obviously on the one side of wanting to take down the sign.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it came down to that one vote I told you about, because he came on board and so did Natasha Tompkins, and they replaced Tom Butke and Quentin Rosendich. As it turned out, the two that left were split, 1-1, and the two that came on board were 1-1 split. Okay. So it could easily have been 5-5 again. Another topic has come up as part of this too, Mike, and that is the idea: how many times can you introduce an item? And the city attorney has told me before that if the body will be willing to entertain it, you could have the same topic on every council meeting from now until the end of time. But the body may at some point want to look at internally, do they want to say no more than once a year or whatever. That didn't come into play here. Nobody was against it. When I first got the request from Mike, I went to the council president and the mayor, and they both said, hey, if this is a topic people are talking about, let's put it on the agenda. But that might be something to look at in the future, as whether or not something can be on repeatedly.
Right. And just to add another quote on the other side, you have a former police officer, a retired Marshfield police officer, Nick Paschal, saying the mass shootings that Mike O'Reilly talks about are still a rare occasion. They make a lot of headlines, but they're still a rare occasion. Second, the fantasy that's been propagated by the NRA and other groups that the only way to stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun is another fallacy. So that was another thought process in the debate. Ed Wagner said the sign itself doesn't do anything, and this was part of a larger discussion. He said the sign doesn't guarantee that this is going to be a gun-free zone. And then you've got a guy like Hap Wolfgraham, who we should point out is literally an expert on the subject. He's studied gun law for years and years. True. In fact, has been involved in decisions and opinions, I think in the state of Minnesota before on this. Here in Wisconsin, he studied it to no end. And then, because then that's kind of when the debate got into some weeds about liability, and there's all that sort of issue, and maybe just want to expand upon that.
Yeah, the last time we went through this, we had the discussion of whether or not if you tell members of the council that they can't carry, and then someone comes in and starts shooting and kills the person, could their spouse say, look, I'm suing you because you prevented my spouse from having the lawful right carried out to defend himself? And the city attorney ruled that that's not how that plays out, and that's not a concern. But there's a lot of little different issues that come up with this. And one of the ones that was talked about, I think, before, and you mentioned it again here, is this notion that, is it safer to allow guns than not? And like I said, you see this on cable TV all the time. Even in the home, people will say, well, wait a minute, I want to have a gun to protect myself, and that's good because you have intruders. On the other hand, you also hear from time to time that most of the accidents occur from people in the home where somebody got a hold of a child or something happened and they injured themselves. So you can argue forever about the safety issue and whether or not it's better to allow people to carry or not. But you do see people carrying generally. Like I said, Wisconsin is a concealed carry state. And there is a good argument to be made for the fact that bad actors do not read signs. If someone comes in and they want to take us out today, they're not going to be halted by a little thing that says no weapons.
Right. Well, and then the debate went from there to also now not just during meetings, but that building is obviously open during the day with city employees there.
Yep.
And now can they carry concealed to work?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, it was brought up, what happens if they do it, and the enforcement word came up a few times. We're not walking around looking for people in their offices to see if they're carrying. If it did come to our attention that they were carrying, we would deal with it. We would say, look, you're not allowed to carry a firearm in this building. But I got to tell you, Mike, since the meeting, it's come to light that we have a personnel policy that specifically prohibits that. So right now we have a conflict between the signs that are about to come down and the policy that says no employee in City Hall may carry. So what we're going to have to do is bring this forward to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee and see if their intent has been, as part of this, to also modify that personnel policy to allow employees to carry. I think the answer to that will be yes, but again, we have to remove that conflict in the personnel policy.
Yeah. Yes, meaning that policy would now have to be changed according to this vote.
Correct. Because right now we're kind of in limbo. Even though the sign comes down, it says right in the employee manual that you cannot carry.
Well, and it also, that goes against, I guess it was a slim majority.
Yeah.
Who said, I think, was it 45% of city employees who said they didn't want guns there? Correct.
And again, I got a lot of comments with that too, and they were fairly passionate. I did a survey by email, and some wrote and said, hey, look, I don't like this. I don't feel comfortable with my coworkers having guns.
Or weapons, we should clarify.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable with my coworkers having weapons. And then the next email I'd get would say, look, I can carry anywhere, and I'm a responsible person. I've been trained. This is ridiculous that we're not allowed to defend ourselves here at City Hall from an intruder. So, really, if they do Gallup, those folks do polls, it really does come down to kind of a 50-50 thing with people having very strongly held views on both sides.
Right.
And that applies to city employees as well.
Okay, so as of now, weapons are no longer prohibited from inside City Hall.
Correct, although we still have to deal with the employee issue of the personnel manual. But you are correct. That is, they voted to do that, and you'll be seeing that happen.
Yes. Okay. Anything else on that one?
No, it's been an interesting conversation. It really has. I don't find myself very passionate either way because I understand the arguments on both sides. But it's been fun. Fun is the wrong word, I guess.
Yeah.
But interesting to see this evolve
Yeah.
from 2019 until the present.
Right. Okay. All right. That was one big item on the July 12th agenda. The other one that caught my attention was this issue that we've talked about a number of times. And I always like to read the agenda item just to kind of give people the full picture here of what, or where these discussions come from.
Right.
They originate from what's on the agenda. So it says, staff report potential financial and budgetary impact of real estate tax case with Marshfield Medical Center. This has to do with the lawsuit that you and I have talked about on several occasions on this program. They're claiming tax exemption
Yep.
or looking for tax exemption for basically two of their two big properties, the main clinic and the East Wing.
Correct.
And you kind of talked to the council basically about what would the financial and budget impact of that be if they win?
Yeah, you mentioned that Mike O'Reilly was requesting the one on the firearms, and Ed Wagner had specifically requested an update on the finances. He's looking ahead to the 2023 budget, and rightfully so. It's right around the corner. Staff is actually working on it right now as we speak. So the idea being that, the clinic has every right, the same as I do, anybody else does as a taxpayer, to say, look, I think you're overvaluing my property or you valued it wrong or whatever. In this case, the clinic has every right to say, we think we deserve a hospital exemption under state law, that we are more like a hospital than we are like a clinic. And that is the whole issue under the state law. If you can prove that you are more like a hospital than another type of operation, you deserve that exemption possibly. So right now the clinic pays $2.8 million per year, $2.8 million in local property taxes. The city gets about $1.1 million of that, roughly speaking. These are not exact numbers. Right. About 39% of the tax bill comes to the city. The school district is right behind us. I think they get between $900,000 and $1 million. The Wood County is closer to $600,000, and then Mid-State Technical College is the smallest player at maybe $140,000. So we're all kind of concerned about this. Mid-State less than the rest of us maybe because of the size of it. But we're looking at it saying, okay, this is still going on. It's going through court. We don't know how the court case is going to resolve. We better prepare for what happens if we lose, or what happens if we partially lose. And I want to remind the viewers again, Mike, that this is not an all or nothing. This is not like playing a football game where either Green Bay wins or they lose. It's not like that. The court, if we end up in a court setting, could say 30% of this building, the East Wing, is deserving. They do some minor surgeries. They do this. This is like a hospital. The other 70% is more like a clinic use. There's doctors' offices. There's whatever it is. They could divide the pie. But we have to look at it and say, with a real possibility that we could lose at least a part of this, we better be prepared. What happens? And we have honestly not been preparing a lot to now because we've been watching it go through the process, but we may owe them a refund for last year as well, if they win. But so what do we do? How do we do this? Well, in order to make up that difference, we would have to increase taxes about 8%. That's unlikely to happen. And that's not with any new increase to cover added expenses going forward. If we were to cut the budget, we'd have to cut out $1.1 million. That's probably not likely to happen. That would be pretty deep, considering that our overall budget is $23.5 million. That would be, I think about almost 5% of our budget. What's more likely to happen is that it'd be a mix and match. We would say, okay, what if we cut the budget by this much and increase taxes by that much to make up the gap? How would that look? And then there's also the possibility of revenue enhancements, as we usually call it. Other people call it taxes and fees. But we've looked at a wheel tax before. It's never been seen very favorably by our elected officials in the past. What about a transportation utility, what they're doing in Wisconsin Rapids? What about a stormwater utility to make nonprofits pay for their parking lots and stuff because the water runs down into our storm system? That was rejected back in 2002, I guess. But I want them to think about those as ideas to make up the gap. They're not popular generally, but they need to hear everything on the table before they make decisions. So kind of lay the groundwork for the fact that we better plan on at least losing something. How much, I don't know, but getting ready for how we would budget for this.
And these solutions that you talk about, wheel tax, transportation, utility, things of that nature, these are things that, again, you're just bringing to the table as part of the discussion. You're not officially proposing that the city move in that direction to implement these things. You're just saying, look, these are things we might have to look at if we lose the case with the clinic.
Correct. I mean, it's really the third prong. The two prongs we think about the most are raising taxes and cutting expenses. I understand why that's the case, but then what about new revenue? Is there a possible place for a new revenue? And I fully understand, Mike, why people look at these cross-eyed. I'm going to pay for just owning vehicles. I already pay enough for owning my vehicles. Now I give you money for the privilege of having a vehicle in my driveway that I use on city streets. I'm not proposing, staff isn't proposing this, but we want them to know they're out there. They're going to look at, do services need to be cut? Do taxes need to be increased? They need to hear everything before they start weighing in.
We don't have any, the courts move about as quickly as government with things, very, very slowly. So we don't have any idea where this thing is at right now or what may happen here? No,
and truthfully, Mike, both sides have made massive what are called discovery requests, where I send to you, and you're the attorney for the other side, Mike, I want these 40 things. I want all the emails. I want all the documents on your files. I want everything about how you're billing your patients. I want everything about this. And then they ask for a million things from us, too, and we have to respond to them. It takes a long time to even get to the point of going to court. So we're still working through the process of sharing information, looking at, trying to put our cases together. We're not nearly ready to be in a courtroom yet. And I know that's frustrating because it's like, well, I've been hearing about this for a long time. I mean, it's like, how slow does it move? Like you said, court is like dragging. But to be honest, the judge hasn't seen this yet, really. It's not been in his hands. It's been in the hands of the two sides trying to gather the data they need to be able to make their arguments.
Yeah, and it may be one of those things where once you do all this discovery, attorneys on both sides look at everything and go, well, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And they make an offer. Somebody makes an offer. They settle out of court or something. They may never see the courtroom. Who knows?
Correct. There are opportunities to keep this from going to court. I don't know if they'll come to pass, but you hear about pilot payments. People make payments in lieu of taxes. There may be other arrangements that can be worked out to make the city somewhat whole or whatever. But at this point, we're just really, everybody's trying to look at what their case is, how good is it, and where do they stand. So I mean, the relationship between the city and the clinic is cordial. I talked to Pat Board, their chief administrative officer all the time. We have good conversations. We're trying to work to cooperate on other things where we can. This is their right. I know people here don't like it, but as a taxpayer, they can make this argument. To date, though, Mike, I have to tell you, to date, our assessor, the current one and the past one, have never said, oh, they deserve it. I agree. We still haven't seen that they're entitled to this, but maybe it'll be proven out in the end that they're deserving of a part of it, or even all of it, for all I know. But right now, that's yet to be determined.
Well, and you mentioned things like pilot, payment in lieu of taxes.
Correct.
What pilot stands for. They had one of those for years.
They did.
Didn't they?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, it kind of ended. I mean, it was a term-based thing, and they re-upped it a few times, like for the next 3 years we'll continue it, for the next 2 years we'll continue it. And then it didn't continue past a certain point. And that goes back more than 15 years now, I think.
Oh, wow.
And that may be an alternative. I mean, the question with that is, not just is the city being made whole, but what about the county? What about the school district? What about the tech college? Are they being left with, scraps or nothing? So, I mean, I think before you talk about that, and I don't want to go too far because we're not talking litigation strategies here, but just talking at the high level, you need to know, like you do in a private world between you and your neighbor if you're fighting, before I spend a lot of money on attorneys and end up in court, do I really have a case? I mean, do I have an argument with my neighbor that where I'm right, where I deserve to be compensated? And at this point, we're all still analyzing that, I think.
Well, one of these times I'm going to start my question about this with, isn't it also true? It sounds like Perry Mason or something like that. It sounds like we should have a question like that.
Right. If you point the finger at me, then I'm in trouble.
Yeah. So we will, I guess, as we always, or seem to say always with this topic, stay tuned. It's still...
Yeah, it may go on for quite a while. It may
go
on for quite a while, Mike, but I think you'll definitely see it being addressed as part of the 2023 budget process.
Yeah.
And that really is in the next 60 to 90 days that you'll be hearing what, if anything, we're doing to prepare for what could happen.
I mean, you're going to prepare for worst case scenario? 1.1 million?
I don't know that we will. I mean, we're still talking to our attorneys. We're still talking to our assessor. We have meetings by phone, conference calls. I don't think we're going to necessarily prepare for 1.1 million. I mean, if we ever have to do that, if we ever have to cut the budget and increase taxes to compensate for that $1.1 million, it's going to be painful.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, we're not really convinced that it's likely, but we will definitely look at all the options and we'll bring them to the council. We'll let them. I mean, they're the decision makers. They'll have to weigh in on what they think we ought to be doing at this point.
Well, and it's 1.1 million for the city. It's almost $1 million for the school district, like you said. Correct. For these other taxing entities. I mean, it's 2.8 million total, right?
Yeah.
If the clinic
Correct.
is successful, they win the case. Like was said at the council meeting, for people who own property.
Yeah.
In the city of Marshfield, they will have to make up a more than 7% decrease?
It depends how you look at it. In tax revenue, yes.
You got to spread that out.
In overall revenue, it's about 4.7%. Okay. But in terms of the total taxes collected, because that's only a part of the total pie, it'd be over 7. Yeah, it's $112 million assessed value out of $1.6 billion. So $1.6 billion is a big number. That's a total value of property in the city, but $112 million is a good chunk of that.
Okay.
So, and I do want to caution as we wrap up on this topic, Mike, when people start hearing this, if they hear us talking about, putting in a certain amount of money or cutting a certain amount of money in the budget, whatever, to say, oh, they think they're going to lose, oh, they think they're going to win. It doesn't necessarily mean that. We're looking at this very prudently. We're not going to give away our thoughts on where the case stands, where the case is going. But we need to be thinking about the what ifs, as anybody would, being responsible.
Yeah, be prepared.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. There were a couple of agenda items related to the communications department that we're using right now to do this program. This is part of their department. And you can kind of talk about both of these. There was a request to authorize future application for the operation of a low-power FM radio station. And there was another topic, anticipated costs to film and broadcast all city meetings, not just the council meetings and then some other ones that they do, but to do them all. So maybe take those in that order. We'll start with the low-power FM radio station discussion. Yeah,
low-power FM has been talked about before off and on here. One of the potential benefits is the fact that it may reach people that we're not reaching now, people who really aren't wired into our website or YouTube Live or whatever. And it's a good way to communicate with the public. The way I understand it from Tom Laux, our communications director, we could, rebroadcast council meetings, and other programming. We could have city officials being interviewed the way that they've done at WDLB in the past. All sorts of cool things from that to keep people informed. The tie between this and the coverage of meetings is kind of, in part, staffing. I mean, right now, Tom and David do a wonderful job, but there are only two of them. And until we increase the staff of this operation, do either one of these, adding meetings to be covered or adding a low-power FM station, do they stretch us too thin, is what's being talked about. But from what I'm hearing from Tom, I mean, it really wouldn't. The low-powered FM would be something that we can do with our current staff. It wouldn't be 24/7. They wouldn't be programming all the time. There might be music on. It wouldn't always be city broadcasts of government programs. But it'd be a good way to communicate, one other way to reach people. And especially, I'm not being critical toward WDLB, but especially because they are toning back a little bit on some of their local government coverage, Insight and other things like that. So what's interesting about this is the fact that you can't just apply anytime. It's like every 10 years or so you get the opportunity. What Tom is looking at doing is getting permission to apply in 2023, hopefully. But they do this in Point, they do this in Wapaka. It'd be great to have a low-power FM station here in Marshfield to communicate with our residents.
Yeah, and he was telling the council, I'm just looking at some of my notes here, the last time, what you mentioned 2013, the last time there was sort of the open window to do that. It never did get to the council level. He said there was no cost to apply for the license. And he also said you'd have 1.5 years to get the station up and running from the date the license is issued. He talked about a one-time fee of $25,000 to $30,000 for hardware and software to get the station up and running, and kind of go from there, and then 2023 budget process. Those are kind of the things he talked about.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like the coverage would be pretty good. I thought maybe it would just be like the city limits. It sounds like it could go out as far as 20 to 30 miles from here. So you could be driving, to and from, Stratford or Spencer and listening to city programming and keeping up to date with what's going on in the community. That would be really wonderful if that could happen. And I think it's very possible. I think that the council seems supportive. Hopefully we'll get a window of opportunity to apply in the next 12 to 24 months.
Okay.
Regarding the coverage of meetings, Mike, I think when Tom Witzel brought this up a couple weeks ago, I think it was almost a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I don't think Tom has ever been advocating necessarily that we ought to cover every single meeting that we do. You know how many meetings there are at City Hall with all the committees and commissions. But, he's wondering, I think, why do we pick and choose? Well, we'll start doing park recreation and forestry. That's important. Well, historic preservation we don't need to do. And so I think he's kind of wondering, why do we do that, and what's our overall plan? And we really haven't had a plan. We've gotten requests from the public through council members, and we'll add this one. Okay, we'll add that one. People want to see this. But there's a point where, especially when the meetings are remote, you're taking people like David and Tom and really forcing them to do a lot of extra work to cover them. I like the idea that Tom brought up as one of his alternatives to have, I'm going to call them remote cameras because that's as technical as I get, but to have the community center be set up for the meetings of the Park, Recreation, and Forestry Committee, so a person doesn't have to go over there and set all this up. And maybe in other remote locations too. There could be a setup where it's far more automatic. But the other question that came up is, really, does the public expect us to? They really want us to cover all these meetings? Or are they not tuning in? And I know that Tom has got some ideas on how we can find out via surveys, what does the public want to see? Yeah, council meetings, absolutely. Fire and Police Commission is one that people said they wanted to see, so we added it. But down to what level do we want to cover everything? That part is still up for grabs, I think. And no decisions were made at the meeting the other night.
Okay. Yeah, and it's going to just depend on what's on the agenda,
Yep.
Just speaking from a reporter standpoint, I mean, that's what I look at is, okay, are there any things on the agenda that are quote-unquote newsworthy? Now, you could argue that everything you do is newsworthy, and people have, not only that, people have the right to know what's going on. They also do, I mean, these meetings are public meetings. They're open. Right. People have the option of attending them. If they're not being broadcast, that does not mean they're not accessible. You can attend the meeting. They're all posted on the city's website. You can go look at their agendas, see what they're talking about, and if you got if you're interested in something, go attend the meeting. It's as simple as that. It doesn't necessarily have to be broadcast for it to be accessible to the public either.
Very well said, Mike. A lot of people will say, look, you're not following the open meeting law if you're not on TV. There's nothing about the open meeting law that talks about TV. You're right. You can go to the meeting. Now, there was a time during COVID when the meetings were not being held in person, and that's another issue. But typically, you can go to any one of these meetings, and so it's open to you. But I think it's good to cover what people want us to cover. It's just that we're not going to cover 20 committees, I don't think. And I shouldn't say it like that. Maybe someday we will, but I think that's very unlikely.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll go back to what I pick and choose based on what's on the agenda. Is it going to have, a lot of interest? Again, the sort of, routine agenda for some of these committees or commissions or boards is pretty dry. They're sort of routine business. It's only when you have something out of the ordinary on the agenda where you go, oh, okay, well, that's something new. That looks interesting. Maybe we should air or broadcast or film that one because there's a new, we're talking about Winslow Family Plaza or something. What is that? We've never seen that on the agenda before. We better cover that one. Right. But normally we wouldn't have to because there's nothing out of the ordinary.
You're right.
So
you're right. And not only that, but most of the committees they don't have the authority to take a lot of actions. Right. They come up, their recommendations come up through the committee system, maybe Finance, Budget and Personnel, or Board of Public Works. Then they have to be approved by the council. So if the Historic Preservation Commission decided next week meeting, we want to spend $25,000, they can't. They can make a recommendation, but it's never going to be a final thing that comes out of that meeting anyway. It's going to come up through the system, and you're going to see it at another meeting that we are covering. And that's not to minimize what they do. They're great people on these committees. They do wonderful work. But some of them don't have any finality. They are advisory in nature, and I'm not sure they all need to be on TV.
Yeah, and if there's a financial element to it, it will ultimately go to Finance and Budget,
Correct.
Which is already broadcast.
Correct.
And then ultimately Council, which obviously is broadcast.
Yeah, so they don't have a lot of final authority on many matters. And again, that's not to underestimate their work and what they do, but it does kind of dictate how many hours can we spend on these various coverages. So.
Yeah, it comes down to, there are only so many hours in the day, only so many people, and your budget's only so big. Sure, you could do it. Could you do everything? Yeah.
Yep.
It comes with a price tag, comes with adding staff and so on and so forth.
Yep.
All right. Now I'll ask about a couple of agenda items, or I guess I should say closed session items. I was asked just, in case there's, a slip of the tongue and I get some information that I'm not supposed to.
Yeah, there you go.
Right? So
there you go.
Just see if you're on your guard today.
I will. I'll be on my guard.
A couple of agenda items in the closed session. Possible sale of city property, McGee Street and Pine Avenue area. Possible transfer of former city property. That's one we've talked about before, located at 8th and Hemlock, the old skating rink, as a lot of us know it, over by Beal Stadium there. And then possible assistance for a project located within TIF District number 10. That's the possible redevelopment of the Marshfield Mall property.
Yeah, I'll touch at a very high level on these. Periodically we have a request for someone to buy typically a small piece of city property, an outcast piece for some reason. And that did come up, and it was actually voted on in open session, and it didn't pass. It was decided that the city should retain that piece for right now, so nothing is coming from that one. The 8th and Hemlock one, you may remember a couple of years ago, it's a property that used to be used for park purposes across from the middle school, and we did sell it to someone who was going to put in 3 single-family homes. That individual now, it looks like he's not going to go through with the project. He's looking at maybe transferring it to another individual, and that raises questions for the council to consider about, what that might mean, what the future use might be proposed to be, and I really can't report anything from that except that that conversation was held, and we'll see what goes on down the future. The other one, though, I just want to touch on is about the Marshfield Mall. And just to say again, and I know it probably gets boring to hear this, but there are people excited about the mall project, the idea of getting new retailers in, kind of modifying the model to make it more of a series of stores side by side. Those discussions continue with the council. They are asking the city to be a financial piece of this puzzle. And we're still trying to work toward an agreement as to how that might work. Nothing to report yet. I'm hopeful that by the end of the summer, there will be something to report publicly, but they've been fruitful conversations, and stay tuned.
Okay. Yeah, it's not like, a police squad situation, right? Where
No.
there's all this building happening in the background and you've got somebody saying, nothing to see here, please.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
No.
There's nothing happening.
But I've got to wonder, if you're the public and you see that we've gone into closed session on the mall like 5 times now in the last 3 months, what's going on? Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? I really can't talk about that. That's why it's closed session.
Right.
But I will tell you, though, what I said is the discussions have been good between the developer and the city. And I'm hopeful personally that we'll be able to come to some decision that will help us to do something good for the community. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. So when did you say that project was moving forward? Oh, okay, just checking.
Very good.
Just checking.
Nice try, Mike.
Nice try. I didn't see anything else that really jumped out at me, caught my attention or whatever. Again, it was just sort of the standard business of the council, beyond those items. Anything else?
Not really. And I did introduce publicly our new HR director, Sarah Dressel. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Sarah Dressel. Why did I get Shara? Sarah Dressel, who comes to us with a lot of experience in professional HR management. Good to have her on board. But you're right. Other than that, it was a pretty quiet agenda for a day in the middle of summer, I guess. Not a lot happening. That'll crank up as we get into the budget process.
Okay, very good. Well, Steve, thanks as always for the opportunity. We certainly appreciate it.
Good to be here, Mike. Thanks to you for tuning in to this episode, if you will, of the post-council meeting news conference. We do this again after every meeting of the Marshfield Common Council. I want to thank Mike Warren for being here to be interacting with me as we debrief what happened. And on behalf of the city, everyone connected with the city of Marshfield, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.